Hello, welcome to my screencast. This will review Chapter 5 for you on operant conditioning. A few things to think about as we go through this module and this chapter. What is operant conditioning? What are the rules for operant conditioning? And how can we account for operant conditioning? Think of this too in the context of, we just finished our chapter and module on classical conditioning. How is operant different from classical conditioning, and how are they the same? Why are they both considered forms of conditioning? Our learning objectives for this chapter include, I want you to be able to identify the stimulus or discriminative stimulus, the response, and the outcome in operant conditioning. Remember, in classical conditioning, we were talking about SS learning or stimulus learning. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about SRO learning or stimulus, response, outcome. I next want you to be able to distinguish between positive and negative reinforcement and positive and negative punishment and be able to identify examples of each. I want you to be able to describe the procedures of shaping and chaining. I want you to understand the difference between primary and secondary reinforcers and punishers. I want you to also be able to identify factors that influence the effectiveness of punishment. Describe the different schedules of reinforcement and punishment and their effects on responding. We'll also review briefly the matching law and how it applies to choice behavior. And then we will talk about bliss points and the PREMAC principle, maybe a little bit the response deprivation hypothesis. And then finally, I want you to be able to see the clinical applications of operant conditioning, specifically in addiction, and how operant conditioning can be used to help with addiction and other mental health concerns. All right, so the book starts out, it's a little bit confusing here. So they have this picture of this cat in this puzzle box, and they're talking about E.L. Thorndike. And then they define operant conditioning as a process whereby organisms learn to make responses in order to obtain or avoid certain outcomes. They talk about how this was discovered by Edward Thorndike and how he studied these cats in these puzzle boxes. Basically, what Thorndike's research did, and Thorndike actually called his brand of learning instrumental learning or instrumental conditioning. And the idea here behind instrumental learning was that initially, if you take, and this is for any task, but here he had these cats, and they were stuck in these, what Thorndike called puzzle boxes. The box was just equipped with a lever that if the rat eventually steps on the lever, they can open up this little door, escape, and get the food. So he has this hungry cat in the box, and they can smell the food outside the box. And their goal, obviously, is to get out of the box so they can eat the food. So the cat's very motivated inside the box. And what Thorndike noticed was that when he initially put the cat in the box, they would engage in a whole bunch of behaviors that were cat-like behaviors, but they didn't actually get them out of the box, right? They would meow, they would scratch, they would claw, they'd put their little paw out through these slats and try to grab the food. None of that would work. But eventually, as the cat was roaming and scratching and clawing and doing cat-like stuff inside the box, they would stumble upon the lever, which would automatically open the door and get them out. So getting out of the box was a desirable outcome for the cat. And so it was instrumental in the cat getting what they wanted, that lever pressing behavior. So initially, a lot of behaviors are tried. And Thorndike has this graph of, he would put the cat in the puzzle box, and on the first trial, the first time they're in the box, it takes them a long time to escape. It takes them a while to accidentally stumble on that lever. But eventually organisms will begin to track the outcomes, right? All of those scratching, clawing, sticking the paw through the slat behaviors were getting frustrated. They were not getting the desired outcome. But eventually, in the given context or stimulus, the box, the response of pressing the lever got them the desired outcome. And so Thorndike said that that was learning or knowledge that guided future behaviors. in the sense that behaviors with positive outcomes increase and behaviors with negative outcomes decrease. And Thorndike called this the law of effect. And there aren't very many laws in psychology, but this is true that all organisms will engage in behaviors that lead to positive outcomes, and we will decrease behaviors that lead to negative outcomes. And here, if he plotted over trials, over times he put the animal in the box, in the beginning, yeah, it took him a long time to figure it out, but once it clicked, down here by trial 10, the animal knew, oh my gosh, all I have to do is step on this lever and I get out. So the lever stepping behavior increased because of the positive outcome of getting out of the box. So what's the difference then between instrumental and operant conditioning? Well, Thorndike called his brand of stimulus response outcome learning, stimulus being inside the box, response being stepping on the lever, outcome being getting out of the box. He called that instrumental conditioning because the behavior of stepping on the box, the R behavior, was instrumental to getting the desired outcome. And then he was also studying behavior using what we call discrete trials, meaning once the animal got out of the box, the experimenter actually had to physically intervene, pick up the cat, and put them back in the box. So that constituted one trial, but it also kind of interfered with, the whole S, right? The context and, oh, here comes a human and that sort of thing. Skinner built upon Thorndike, and I'll mention Skinner was about 30 years after Thorndike, but he used these principles of instrumental conditioning and this idea of the law of effect, that rewarding outcomes led to increases in behavior, frustrated outcomes lead to decreases in behavior, and just extended that. But here he called his brand of rewarded and punished learning operant conditioning, because he believed that the behavior was used to operate on the environment. And then he also devised a way, because he was very mechanically inclined, he devised a way to use what he called, instead of those discrete trials, free operant trials. And Skinner, if he wasn't such a brilliant person and so mechanically inclined, he was doing kind of maze and puzzle box studies in the beginning. But it was time consuming for him, right? He had to sit there and watch the rat and then start them at the beginning of the maze or put them back in the box when they got out. And that was inconvenient for him. He couldn't be reading or writing or teaching class. So he built this automated operant conditioning box that today we kind of call a Skinner box, which was all automated. Instead of Skinner having to go in and reset the box every time the rat pressed the lever, the rat could just keep pressing the lever and it would automatically get food delivered every time. And so we call that free operant responding. All right, so that's operant versus instrumental conditioning. But what about operant versus classical conditioning? So your book has this graphic, and I want to impress upon you these differences. In operant conditioning, the animal is operating on the environment, right? The response, their behavior is critical for the reward, right? So a stimulus, meaning a situation or a context, for example, you are in a classroom, evokes a response like studying that produces an outcome like getting a good grade. And then the animal or the organism in operant conditioning will connect that context, the stimulus, or what we're going to start calling the SD, discriminative stimulus, with that behavior or response and the outcome. This is different from classical conditioning. In classical conditioning, instead of the organism operating on the environment operated on the organism. The stimulus evoked a response. Food evoked salivation. There was nothing that the organism had to do. It just happened. And then coincidentally, the environmental situation happened to pair a signal, the CS, that predicted the US. So a bell predicted that food was coming, and the animal just automatically learned that the bell meant food. And so we can think of Classical conditioning as automatic or unconscious, and operant conditioning as deliberate or requires conscious thought, right? I have to think about studying, or think about not saying bad words, or think about not hitting my sister in order to achieve desired outcomes. Where here in classical conditioning, it just happens. And then the other point that your book makes is this idea that operant conditioning is more powerful or flexible, meaning we can learn to do many different behaviors by shaping and chaining, which we'll talk about in a second. See, in classical conditioning, you're just salivating, right? Or blinking, or doing a reflex in a new situation. It's not very powerful or flexible. Okay, so let me say this another, perhaps simpler way. In classical conditioning, we're learning signals that predict important events. Bell predicts food, elicits salivation. In operant conditioning, we're learning that a behavior has consequences. Swearing in front of your mom leads to punishment. Let you think about that for a sec. Now, we introduced this term here, SD. What SD? You say, what is an SD? Well, SD stands for the discriminative stimulus, or the context. So instead of just saying S, right, any context, we really mean a specific context, right? And so the example in the book was this example, and I'll try to explain this graphic a little bit. If I cry, mom comes and picks me up, and a baby will learn that. So let's see if we can parse out what the SD, the R, and the O are here. So what's the response in this example before I show you? The response is crying, right? The baby is crying. Well, what is the discriminative stimulus? Mom is the discriminative stimulus, right? If it's dad or no adult, we're going to have a different outcome, right? Because if mom is there, well, I hope dad would pick up the baby crying. But if nobody's there, then nobody will pick up the crying baby, right? So mom becomes the signal or the discriminative stimulus that crying will result in getting picked up and comforted. And then this is showing that the response could be crying, but if the discriminative stimulus, mom, isn't there, then there is no outcome. So the baby will learn, don't cry unless mom is here. Then they'll get a desired outcome. And so that's what this graphic is showing us. So the discriminative stimulus tells us when these contingencies are in effect. When will my behavior get an outcome? Okay. So let's talk about this Skinner box. And here's a picture of a rat in a real Skinner box. The book has some cartoons, very similar. You'll notice there's a house light. We call this big light here a house light. This provides the SD so that if the rat maybe is living in the box and the light is dark, then nothing is active. The rat learns that nothing can happen if the light is out. If the light comes on and that says, oh, if this light is on, I can press this lever over here and it will deliver food or water or milk or a sweet treat into this little container here. And we can't see it in this graphic, but back here is a little, they call it the magazine, where there's a little automated box that's hooked up by these wires to the lever. Every time the lever's pressed, food can get delivered there. I want to mention too, you'll notice there's grid floors here. Well, the grid floors, you'll notice too, there's some bedding, and this little tray can get pulled out. You want to do that because the rat's going to go to the bathroom in there. So if anybody ever had a hamster or a gerbil, you just, keep it clean. You want to have a grid floor so the droppings can fall in there, and then you just clean the pan. But here they're metal. This grid floor, and most Skinner boxes are metal, because you could run shock through this grid floor. So that maybe instead of getting food every time the rat presses the lever, they get punished by a painful shock running through the floor. So we'll talk about that and how Skinner used food, rewards, as well as shock punishments in these boxes. So the book calls the Skinner box like a mini universe, right? So many things can happen here. And so we have a context, the light that signals that the box is on or working. The behavior in here would be the rate of lever pressing. How often does the rat press the lever? And we have a couple different outcomes that can happen in here. We can get a positive added outcome of food delivery, which is a reward, or we can have a negative or subtracted outcome of shock, like taking away a shock, which could also function as a reward. And I want to talk about that more because I know that's super confusing. But before I explain that a little bit better, I want you to look too. We could add or give shock as a punishment, or I could punish this rat by taking away food, right, as a punishment. So I have 4 potential outcomes here. I can add food as a reward, or I could take away shock as a reward. I could add shock as a punishment, or I could take away food as a punishment. For anyone who has ever heard of positive and negative reinforcement and punishment, that's what we're talking about here. So let's explain that. What do we mean by positive and negative reinforcement and punishment? And this is a source of confusion for so many people. I want you to key things to remember here is that reinforcement is always good in the sense that it's always going to increase behavior. People will work for any type of reinforcement, whether it's positive or negative. And so punishment then is what you think it is. It's always bad, and punishment will always decrease behavior. So then what do they mean by the positive and the negative? Positive and negative here then don't mean good and bad. What's good and what's bad? Reinforcement means good and punishment means bad. Instead, the positive literally means positive in a mathematical sense, to add something, and negative means to subtract or take something away. So let's see how that works. When we do that, we have 4 possible contingencies: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. In positive reinforcement, we're going to do a behavior like study hard, and we're going to get something good, like a good grade or maybe money. In negative reinforcement, we're going to study hard, and we're going to get something equally good, but in this case, I'm not giving something, but I'm taking away something you didn't want anyway. So maybe I subtract a chore. You get good grades, you don't have to mow the grass. You studied hard, got good grades, you don't have to take the final exam. So there are a lot of ways that we can reward behavior, not by giving, but by taking away something you didn't want to do anyway. Negative reinforcement is the stickiest point, I think. Really think about it, but always remember, if it's reinforcement, it's always good. Negative just means I'm rewarding by taking something away. Now, positive punishment, identical. It's just in positive punishment, you do something inappropriate or bad, like hit your sister, and I'm going to give you something bad, like a spanking. Or you say a bad word, I'm going to wash your mouth out with soap. So positive punishment is getting something bad, and negative punishment is taking away or losing something good. Like you hit your sister, you lose your phone. You lose the video game privileges. You lose car privileges. So positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement are always good. They are always rewards, and they will always increase behavior. Positive punishment, negative punishment, always bad, will always decrease behavior. One more thing I want to mention about that, and that is this issue of the primary versus secondary reinforcers and punishers. in this sense, primary means something that is unlearned or naturally rewarding. Little babies would like it. In secondary reinforcers and punishers, we have to learn to understand their value or their consequences. So, for example, primary reinforcers are things like food, water, sex, oxygen, drugs, right? Drugs do function as primary reinforcers, all the drugs of abuse. We don't have to learn to appreciate them. Secondary reinforcers are things that we have to learn to value, like money, or A's, or fame, or power, or status. So, primary unlearned, secondary learned. Examples of primary punishers, things like shocks, or spankings, or washing your mouth out with soap, like to produce that bad taste in your mouth. Secondary punishers, we have to learn that they're bad. So, getting F's, feeling unpopular or unliked, having maybe low status or like a low status job. Some people find that undesirable, but not everybody, right? So primary, unlearned, would affect everybody the same way. Secondary, we have to learn to appreciate their value. So I want to take a second and just go over this graphic from the book. Basically, what this is talking about is the basic pattern of operant conditioning. It's very similar, actually, to classical conditioning in the basic sense of we always start out with no learning, right, pre-training, and then we go through an acquisition period of learning, and then we learn the response. We can also go through extinction, where the response will go away, and we may see some spontaneous recovery, which isn't really covered here, but anyway. So in operant conditioning, then, what we're talking about is during pre-training, like when we first put the cat in the puzzle box, they had a low spontaneous rate of R, the response of pressing the lever, right? Rats go into Skinner boxes. They do not automatically press levers. A puppy, when you bring them home, they don't automatically sit and give you paws, right? So they have this low spontaneous rate of shaking paws, for example, in a puppy. You don't see wild dogs shaking paws. So we train them, right, where we introduce this contingency. In a given stimulus, for example, if I am present in the room with a bag of treats, if my dog sits and shakes, then they get the treat, the outcome. So during this training process, the animal will hopefully undergo acquisition, where if they discover that contingency or that relationship between if you shake, I will give you a treat, then they will shake more frequently. The response will increase. Now, let's say, for example, I run out of treats and my dog is sitting and trying to give me paws over and over again, and I stop rewarding them. Eventually, they're going to be like, what the heck am I sitting and shaking for? And they will stop. They will go through extinction. And that happens with operant conditioning too. So this last point here I want to mention. So the book is saying, note that if the response has a low initial rate, the animal has to discover the contingency. So how do we help an animal discover the contingency? You and I call it training, right? Skinner called it shaping. So in shaping and chaining, we can initiate behaviors that don't occur spontaneously, and we can also condition very, very complex behaviors. So let me just explain shaping. Shaping is reinforcing through successive approximations, right? That's Skinner's words. What that means is rewarding behaviors that get closer and closer to the desired response. So initially, we have to start small, right? First, your dog has to learn to sit before they can shake, right? Give you a paw. Why? Because they're on all fours. They can't just start lifting up their paw. They might tip over. So we gradually train them to sit, and then we can add in the shake the paw. And so we want to be very, very consistent and reward the animal every single time they do that behavior so that they get it and they acquire the behavior. Then we'll see in a minute that we can actually change up how often we reward them, and we want to change how often we reward them because we want to keep that behavior persistent. But that's shaping, reinforcing successive approximations or starting small and building your way up through rewards, positive reinforcement. Chaining, then, we take these smaller behaviors like sitting, and then we gradually add shaking the paw, then we gradually add maybe rolling over, then playing dead, or maybe you want to get your dog to jump through a hoop, or maybe you want to train a squirrel to water ski. So it's the same principle, we're just getting more and more complex, but you have to build gradually. You can't get a dolphin to jump through a hoop spontaneously that's 50 feet above the water, right? You have to gradually build up to that. So here they're giving you an example. Initially train an animal to pick up an object, then you can train them to throw the object, like in the video where the rats are playing basketball. So we can chain up these really complex behaviors that are quite cute, like this little squirrel water skiing who is adorable. So, okay, the key, you want to make sure you start small. You got to make sure that the animal is motivated, right? Hungry for the reward, or that you're using the correct reward. So what we're talking about here, in shaping and chaining, well, it's got to be positive reinforcement, right? So what about negative reinforcement? And what about punishment? How do those work, and when can we use them? I want to take a second and explain this table. This table is actually awesome, but it's overwhelming when you first look at it. So what they're showing you is this 4x4 matrix. We can have, remember we were talking about positive and negative, and then reinforcement and punishment. And this table is putting it all together for you so that when we say positive, we mean to add an outcome. So we can have positive reinforcement where we add a reward, but we can also have positive punishment where we add a punishment. We can then also remove an outcome. We can have negative reinforcement where we remove an outcome. For example, if we take aspirin, our headache will be removed or will go away. So our aspirin taking behavior increases. It's being reinforced. Why? Not because we're getting high or getting something good from the aspirin, but because we're taking away some pain. Negative punishment, same thing. We're punishing here not by giving you something bad, but by taking away something that you like. For example, time out is negative punishment. Notice that they also call escape or avoidance training for negative reinforcement. It's like you're escaping or avoiding the pain. And in negative punishment, omission training, because you're taking away, like, opportunity to play or opportunity to use your phone or taking away the car, taking stuff away. Okay, so do take a look at that table. I hope that that makes this a little bit clearer to explain positive and negative reinforcement and punishment. So let's talk a little bit more about punishment. Punishment's very interesting. Notice that punishment is defined as an outcome that decreases the frequency behavior. It does not say stop. And yet the goal of punishment, our goal is to stop a behavior, right? I want to stop my kid from running across the street without looking, right? I want to stop my kid from hitting their little sister. I want to stop my kid from swearing. And yet punishment is not really that effective. So let's talk about why punishment is not really that effective. Yes, it will decrease behavior. My kids will stop hitting each other when they're in front of me. But do I really believe that they've stopped hitting each other completely? No. So let's talk about some of these factors that determine the effectiveness of punishment. One thing the book talks about is how punishment leads to more variable behavior. That, okay, I don't want my kid to hit their sister, but what are they going to do instead? And without rewarding an alternative behavior, I have no control over what they're going to do instead. So that's something to think about very carefully. Think about your dog, right? You punish your dog for peeing in the house, but you give them an alternative behavior, right? You reward them for going outside, and eventually they'll figure it out. To make punishment most effective, we have to make sure that we reward alternative behaviors. Otherwise, we're going to get all kinds of crazy behaviors, some that we're not going to like any better than the one that we're punishing. So that's at point one. The other thing about punishment is these discriminative stimuli, right? That kids are smart, dogs are smart. If I'm always punishing my dog for peeing inside, but no one else in the family is, then the dog might not pee if I'm home, but if somebody else is home, he's going to pee wherever he wants because there is no consequence. If I punish my kids for swearing, but my husband lets it slide, kids learn don't swear in front of me, okay to swear in front of dad. So be careful about that. Everybody has to be consistent. The third point is this idea of concurrent reinforcement. Concurrent means at the same time. So what happens a lot with punishment, we see this a lot, especially in kids, swearing, talking in class. The teacher may punish the behavior, but the friends are providing a different kind of reinforcement, right? They're giggling, laughing, seeing how cool the kid is for talking or breaking the rules or saying funny words. So they're getting this other reinforcement at the same time that's outweighing the punishment. So that's going to decrease how effective the punishment is, right? And then this last idea is about intensity. As crazy as it sounds, you cannot work your way up, right? You can't give a small punishment and then realize that's not working and get more harsh. You have to start with the harshest punishment you plan to use. Otherwise, they just habituate to the punishment. And so the book will talk about that. So how can we make punishment more effective? I want to look at this slide a little bit. The book gives us 3 key ways to make punishment more effective. They talk about immediacy, meaning punish right away, immediately after the behavior. It's very ineffective for Johnny to get in trouble at school at 9 a.m. and not get a punishment until 4 o'clock when he gets home. The context is totally different. The behavior is forgotten. So, you're basically punishing Johnny at 4 o'clock for whatever he was doing at 4 o'clock, not what he did at 9. So we have to make sure that we are close in time or immediate. The schedule of reinforcement. We're going to talk about these schedules in a minute because I know they are confusing. But making sure that at least in the beginning, you are every single time, right? And we call that an FR1, fixed ratio 1. And then alternatives, making sure that you're rewarding the alternative behavior like we do with our pets. Punish for peeing inside, but hey, let's get rewarded for peeing outside. That's the behavior we want. So giving and rewarding other responses is going to greatly decrease the likelihood that the punished response occurs. So to clarify that, those ideas of immediacy and schedule, the book talks about how we build this SRO or stimulus response outcome association. 2 key things that determine the effectiveness of operant conditioning: timing from the behavior to the consequence, and the schedule or the relationship between the behavior and consequences. So in the last couple minutes of this video, I want to talk a bit about these schedules. Timing, I think, is pretty clear. This is showing that if we have no delay, learning is fastest. Long delay, learning is not even there. But let's talk about these schedules of reinforcement. So there are 4 schedules, and I want to go through these because I think they're a little bit confusing the way they're presented. There are 2 main kinds: ratio, which are based on the number of responses, and interval, which are based on time since the last response. So then both of these, ratio and interval, can be either fixed or variable. So in a fixed ratio, every X number of R's or responses produces one outcome, is what this graphic means. So in an FR1, one response, and this, I guess, is supposed to be a man pressing some sort of a lever, and his reward is an ice cream cone. Every single lever press gets him an ice cream cone, and that's a fixed ratio 1. Ratio based on the number of lever presses, and each one yields an outcome. In an FR2 schedule, fixed ratio 2 schedule, it would be every 2 responses produces the outcome. So here, first lever press, nothing. Second lever press or pull, whatever he's doing here, gets him the ice cream cone. Next one, nothing. But 2 in a row gets him the ice cream cone. In an FR3, take a guess. 3 presses before we see the ice cream cone. 3 more presses before we see another ice cream cone. And then we can fill in the blank here with the X. FR 10, 20, 30, whatever, before you get your ice cream cone. So what are some real life examples of that? Well, think of any kind of commission job or maybe factory work where every envelope you stuff earns you a penny, or every 10 boxes you build earns you $1, those kinds of things. So in these fixed ratio schedules, you have to make a particular number of responses, build boxes or stuff envelopes before you get your reward. For a rat in a Skinner box, it might be every 5th lever press gets them a treat. For your dog, it might be every single time he sits, he gets a treat. Every 10th time he sits, he gets a treat. Every 20th time he sits, he gets a treat. Those sorts of things. You'll notice here the book talks about this post-reinforcement pause. I just want to mention that in any kind of fixed ratio schedule, that people will count. If you're getting paid $10 to stuff 100 envelopes, you're going to count in your head until you get to 100 envelopes, and then you're going to take a little break. Whew, that was a lot. And you're going to get yourself back together. Maybe you'll take a restroom break, whatever. You're going to take a little break. Then you're going to come back and stuff as fast as you can, those 100 envelopes, to get to your 100, and then you'll take your next little break. And everybody does it like that. Everybody on a fixed ratio schedule does it like that. So rats will do it, people will do it, commission jobs where you're getting paid, you celebrate after you get that commission, and that's the post-reinforcement pause. Now in a variable ratio, they keep you guessing. It's still based on the number of responses that you make, but you never know for sure how many. How many responses is it going to take? And the best example of this is gambling. But let me show you how they're doing it in the graphic. So here this poor man is pulling or pressing this lever. Here he does it 3 times, he gets his treat. Now he had to do it 7 times to get his treat. Oh, here he only had to do it once to get a treat. Oh, one more got him another treat. Oh my gosh, now he's got to press 18 times to get a treat. And that's what this is trying to illustrate over here. So the first one was 3 presses, the second was 7, then he had 2 ones in a row, then he had 18. And we can get an average, divide the total number of presses by the total number of rewards, and we get this variable ratio 6. So on average, every 6th response is getting rewarded, but this guy doesn't know, is it going to be the first one, the 3rd one, the 18th one, something more? And that's how slot machines work. You never know, are you going to get rewarded on the first quarter that you put in, the second quarter? The book also gives us examples of sports. I can think of golf, right? So sometimes, or baseball, sometimes your first swing is a home run. Sometimes you're in that drought, 10 swings before you get another home run, that sort of thing. You never really know. But it is based on the number of swings or the number of lever presses, the number of pulls on the video poker machine or whatever. Okay, let's talk about these interval schedules real quick. So interval schedules are based on time. Most of us are paid on a fixed interval schedule. If you're paid by the hour or you're paid on salary, you are paid on a fixed interval schedule. It's based on the amount of time. You get a paycheck every week or twice a week or once a month if you're on salary, or you're getting paid by the hour. So you know that here on a fixed interval 1 minute, this guy, he's got to make some responses, right? He's got to press the lever at least once in that minute. But as long as he makes at least one press in that minute, he will get his ice cream cone every single minute. Same thing here. Oh. What you'll notice is that in these interval, we will get these scallops. It's just like the post-reinforcement pause, right? So if you're paid by the hour, or if you're paid like every Friday, we see this all the time. Monday, Tuesday, or early in the hour, you're not working that hard. Although most people aren't really you're not really getting the $10 at the end of the hour. It's usually at the end of the week. So I'll use week as the example here. So let's say, where'd my little mouse go? So let's say here is Monday, Tuesday, not too much responding. Wednesday, you start doing a little bit more. Thursday. Up here by Friday, you're working really hard. You know you're about to get paid. Bam, you get paid Friday, and then you take the next day off. You go and spend your paycheck. And then you just kind of cycle through that. So we do get another post-reinforcement pause here. And that's what these scallops are. And more interestingly is that work is really kind of tapering off here. Early in the interval and picking up at the end of the interval. So those are fixed interval. Then variable interval schedules is like you don't really know when you're going to get paid. And so in a variable interval schedule, people don't know when they're going to get paid. And so they just keep working consistently all the time. Okay, so my video is becoming very, very long here, but I was able to get through the schedules of reinforcement. You will notice that the generally highest rates of response are ratio schedules. The ones where we're being paid by the number, like commission. So why don't more jobs pay on commission like that? Why don't I get paid by the number of students? Well, one of the biggest reasons is burnout. For anybody who's ever gotten paid on commission or by the number of items that they produce, we work really, really hard, really, really fast, and then we get exhausted and our quality of work declines. And a lot of times people in these commission jobs have a number value in mind. They'll work till they make the amount of money they want to make, and then they'll quit. So it winds up making more money for companies and being better for companies to have slower, steady rates of responding, which are produced by these variable intervals, fixed interval schedules, right? So yeah, they're never going to produce as much as they would have if they were on the fixed ratio, but they're going to come back to work tomorrow. And that ultimately saves companies money. Okay. Last thing, the book talks about the matching law. I don't believe we have any questions on the matching law, but this is on things that are getting reinforced concurrently. And basically people are smart that we're going to maximize our behavior so that we will maximize rewards under all schedules. And that's known as behavioral economics, studies how behavior can be maximized like that, and Bliss Point, which talks about how organisms know where that ideal level of responding is so they maximize their rewards. The last thing I'll mention, because we do have a question about this, is pre-mat principle. And the idea here is that we can use knowledge about operant conditioning in a variety of ways, including, changing behavior or getting people or kids or pets or dogs to do things that we want them to do. And the classic, I know your parents have been using this on you your whole life. You probably never knew there was a real name for it. It's called the pre-mat principle. It's getting people to do less desirable behaviors by rewarding them with the opportunity to do higher desirable behaviors. For example, eat your broccoli so you can get dessert, or do your homework so you can get the phone or get to play video games, or so forth. Okay, very long, but hopefully I reviewed some of the key things about operant conditioning and helped to clarify some of these points for you. Thanks.